Yo, what's up everybody? Welcome to an Aetherdrift tips, tricks, and traps video, getting you prepared for pre-release. So my goal for this video is to be pretty snappy. This is kind of like, all right, I got 10 minutes to watch a video before pre-release. Maybe you're sitting in your game store just waiting for the packs to be dealt. This video is just going to be some quick hits of what's going on in the format so you don't feel like you're going in blind. If you do have more time and you want some more in-depth thoughts, you can go check out the video I posted yesterday, which is our 5-hour big ol' set review. As you might imagine, in a 5-hour set review, we go very in-depth on everything that you need to know about the set for your first drafts, for your pre-release. But if this is all you're working with, I want to get you up to speed too. So let's talk about just a few things that I think you need to know, just some questions that I know a lot of people have had about this set. And let's start with the vehicles. So a few thoughts on vehicles going in is I think you really want to be picky about the vehicles you choose to include in your deck, because I found in my 2 drafts so far, 2 early access drafts, that I've been overloaded on vehicles in my deck. As in, even when I've got like 3 or 4, I kind of feel like if they're not the best of the best vehicles, I rather just have a creature a lot of the time. I'm not trying to say don't play vehicles. I'm not trying to say don't put them in your deck, but be particular about them. I described a situation where, I'm not even talking about vehicles that are tough to crew. I'm talking about crew 1 vehicles. And even then, I kind of felt like that it was a pretty clunky draw when I drew even 2 of them. There are going to be some archetypes, like red-white vehicles, that carry out vehicles a little bit more than other decks. But, the headliner of this set is vehicles. And so I'm sure a lot of people are going to be very tempted to play, 5, 6, maybe even 7 vehicles in some case in their deck. I would just ratchet that back a little bit. Now, I do want to make a distinction. There's kind of 2 types of vehicles. There's the vehicles that are just, they need to be crewed by something else. For example, this air response unit. It's just, kind of vanilla vehicle. But there's also vehicles that crew themselves some way. Something like Broadcast Rambler. Comes with a 1/1 flyer. It can already crew itself. There's also vehicles that you can, pay mana into to turn into artifact creatures for good. You don't need to crew them. These ones that are kind of self-sufficient, I'm a lot less picky about. But the ones that, especially like Air Response Unit, which by all means is a fine card, doesn't have any enter the battlefield effect or anything like that, doesn't crew itself, those are the ones I think you want to be pretty particular about. Don't overload on them. I would say you want to aim for about 2 vehicles that don't crew themselves. 3 is probably okay too, but like I said, even when I drew 2 vehicles in my games today, I was like, oh man, I just wish this was a creature. An additional word of caution about vehicles, or I guess, with mounts too, is just understanding that crew 1 and crew 2 and crew 3 are all pretty different. Crew 1, that's easy, right? Just tap a 1/1 token, whatever, anything can crew, that's great. Crew 2, or Saddle 2, or whatever, you're generally going to be tapping a real creature to turn on your vehicle or saddle your creature, so a bit more of a cost. Once you get to Crew 3, that's when it's like, okay, you're tapping multiple creatures, or you're taking a creature that could generally attack and block pretty well out of the equation. It's a real cost. And yes, there are pilot tokens scattered throughout the set. Something like Roadside Assistance gives you a pilot token. Or there's this cycle of road lands at uncommon that you can sacrifice to give you a pilot token. Or there's just some creatures that have the pilot text where they can crew bigger things than their power normally would let them. But they're not just running around the set, right? It's not just like clues or blood or treasure where it's just like a bunch of commons have it. They're there, they exist, but you're only really going to have a few of these in your deck. So if you think, okay, well, Crew 3 is not that big of a deal with these pilot tokens. True, definitely. But you're not always going to have them. You're not always going to open them into your sealed pool, and even in draft, it's not going to be that easy to pick up a bunch of them and just be able to play these Crew 3 vehicles just freely. Next up, I want to talk about the Start Your Engines mechanic. So this one's kind of interesting. On first read, if you haven't done a complete look through the set, it reads like an aggro mechanic, right? It's like start your engines, wants to attack, if you want to deal your opponent damage every single turn. And it is in a lot of cases. For example, this red, black, and common, great card by the way, very clearly a beatdown card. But there's also another bucket of start your engines cards that are slower cards. Something like Vinwick's here that is clearly an aggro card. It just kind of sits there and blocks and eventually draws you a bunch of cards. I wouldn't think about Start Your Engines as an aggro mechanic necessarily. I would think of it more as just like a mini game that gets introduced to the game when you have a Start Your Engines card. So that mini game is pretty easy to win or to play if you're an aggro deck, right? You can just keep getting in and nice, okay, every single turn, maybe you peck in for a few points and you get up to max speed and your cards get better. But the slower decks also have tools to enabling a Start Your Engine. So for example, we've got Wreckage Wickerfolk, which I think is just a great card, by the way. One of the better black commons. 2 mana, 1/3 flyer that surveils 2 when it comes in. Not only does it help with Start Your Engines, but helps with the graveyard stuff in the set. Is an artifact. Just all around a very solid 2-drop. So even in your slower decks, this is your 2-drop. You play a Start Your Engines card after that. this thing can start pecking in. It's not going to be a big clock or anything, but if your minigame is, well, I've got these start your engines cards, these slower start your engines cards in the battlefield, then yeah, you'll peck in a few turns, and then eventually these grindy start your engines cards turn on, and you'll start to be advantaged as the game goes on. There's also some tools for these slower start your engines decks that lets you raise your speed and make your opponent lose life without actually having to get involved in combat. So something like Pact Altair, for example, pretty good for like a blue-black slower starts your engines deck. I've also felt that as far as playing against start your engines, I don't want to jump through too many hoops to stop my opponent from getting to max speed, because most of the bonuses on start your engines, like the max speed bonuses, are small upgrades, right? It's not just like, oh my gosh, they got to max speed and now I can never beat them. It's not like Corrupted from Phyrexia All Will Be One, where it feels like, you know, once you get to that 3 poison counters, it's just like, oh my gosh, like all of their cards are so much better. Usually it's an incremental bonus. For example, on the Thrill Seeker here, Death Touch Haste makes it better for sure, but it's not just like, okay, if I get to this crucial point and they get to max speed start your engines, it's going to be an uphill battle. I've kind of just felt like I'm making normal combat decisions where it's like, well, should I block here? Should I take the damage? Maybe getting to max speed is a bit of a tiebreaker where I'm like, well, do I want to block? Do I want to race? I'm not sure. It's something to consider, but don't just block at all costs. That's kind of what I'm getting at. Don't just automatically chump block to stop your opponent from getting to max speed. Cycling is back as a mechanic in this set, and Blue-Red is a deck that cares about cycling / cares about drawing and discard. It's a fairly minor theme. It's not like Ikoria, for those who played Ikoria, where it was just like, you know, half the set cared about cycling. And I think also, especially for your sealed deck, it's not going to come together all that often. There's not really good payoffs for cycling at common. You're really looking at the uncommons, and there's some pretty good uncommons for this deck. Scrounging Skyray and Marauding Mako, kind of similar cards, just cheap threats that grow really, really large when you do cycle, and these are great cards if you have them. Boosted Sloop, also a really good vehicle for this deck, just letting you loot every single turn. But I wouldn't feel comfortable going like the all-in cycling plan unless you've got like, I'd say 3 or 4 payoffs, like this, maybe 2 copies of the Stingray, a Mako, and you know, maybe a rare payoff or something. So look out for it once in a while, but it's not going to be something that comes together and sealed all that often. Then we've got the Exhaust mechanic, which is basically just a mana sink, right? It's nothing special. There are some cards that call out when you activate an exhaust ability, or there's some abilities that say you can exhaust your cards multiple times. But for the most part, you just want to think of this as a good place to put your mana as the game goes on, and especially in sealed, right? You're really looking for those. You're looking for mana sinks. You're looking for ways not to run out of things to do with your mana. So basically, any exhaust card I think is going to be pretty good. You know, obviously some are better than others, but if you're just looking for a 2-drop and it's got exhaust compared to a 2-drop that doesn't have exhaust, yeah, I might just lean towards the exhaust one. And then just to close out here, I want to highlight some of the best signpost uncommons. So one thing that I think is true about this set is the gold cards across the board are all pretty good. I think all of the signpost uncommons, there's 20 of them in the set, by the way, 2 gold cards for each color pair. They're all pretty strong. When I'm building my sealed pool, I don't think you really need to go through and be like, oh, is this a good one? Is this a good one? I think you can kind of just be like, well, if I can play this card, I would like to play this card. But there are some that stand out above the rest, and I'm just going to pick up my top 5 here, just, you know, no particular order, but really strong cards. So, Cloudspire Coordinator, first one here, the red-white uncommon, 3/1, scries 2 when it enters, and whenever a mount or vehicle enters, you can tap this thing to make a pilot token. Good stats, cruise things nicely, gets that scry, poops out tokens, not much to hate with this one. Then we've got the blue-green exhaust card here, Sky Serpent Seeker, 2 mana 1/1 Death Touch Flying. You can pay 4 mana for the exhaust to put a counter on it and basically rampant growth twice. You don't get to go search your library for lands, but you get to reveal till you find 2 lands, put them on the battlefield, card advantage, cheap blocker, good attacker, not much to hate here too. Haunt the Network up next, 5 mana, make 2 Thopters, then you drain your opponent for the number of artifacts you control. I will say that unlike some artifact sets where you just have like millions of artifacts lying around, maybe artifact lands, little trinkety baubles, 1 mana things, not as much of that in this set. You know, there's not just going to be, this isn't going to be drained for 8 automatically. Although I already have seen this drain for 8 on Sam Black's stream. I think you can pretty reasonably expect this to drain for 3 or 4. And if you do happen to have more, that's awesome. Also a card I might splash in like a black-white deck or a red-black deck or something like that. They also play very well in multiples, right? Of course, because the first one makes 2 Thopters, the next one's going to make more and more. So yeah, that also makes my top 5. Then we've got Broadside Barrage, just a really good removal spell. 3 mana deal 5 instant that loots. Obviously, if you have some discard payoffs in there, triggers those, but just the loot alone is really nice. And then last one here, maybe the best one? I don't know. Embalmed Ascendant. This is a 3-mana 1/2 that has Start Your Engines. When it enters, you make it 2/2. So that's already good. You know, you've got 3 mana for 3/4 worth of stats over 2 bodies. And then when you get to max speed, this creature gains. Whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses a life. You gain a life. So just a really great package of abilities here. Really good just on the vanilla test, right? So much power and toughness for the mana. And yeah, just nice to have that drain ability too. Yeah, and that's all I have for today. So hope you enjoyed this little pick me up. I'm also going to include my 17 lands tier list in the description. So let's just say you're opening your sealed pool and you're like, I don't know how good this rare is. Just check in with that, give you a bit of a baseline, give you a letter grade. But yeah, that's going to do it. Hope you enjoy your pre-release. If you're not subscribed already and you like this video, please do leave a comment, like, subscribe, all that stuff. And we'll see you next time.